John Adams will be out, but he's the only one I'm aware of. Okay, I'm going to call to order the September 25th meeting of the Montpelier Planning Commission. We've approved the agenda, so I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved.
All right, motion from Brian. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Maria. Those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Agenda approved. Next, we have comments from the chair. My comments, what I have in mind is related to the meeting from last time, so I'll just save it for that. Did anyone else have any announcements or comments or anything? Okay. Aaron had sent us an email about an A&R event happening in October, but he's not here yet, so we'll just move on. So the next item on the agenda is comments from the general public about something not on the agenda. Seems we don't have any of those. It's all planning commissioners here, so we're going to keep going. And next is our discussion. If I can click on the right stuff. So debrief of the listening session. The agenda says we can make any decisions on what to add to the zoning amendment. But before we get to that, I was just going to kind of open up the floor and see what people's thoughts are in light of everything we heard at the last meeting where we had the listening session relating to density and the zoning regulations.
Do you think that the notion that some people said that we should wait on, and this is not my feeling, but do you think that the notion that we should wait on any zoning until, while everything settles down after the flood is something that has legs beyond just a few comments at the thing, like politically, or do you think? I defer to you guys. You know better than I do.
I mean, my take on it is that things happen all the time, and zoning changes are being considered all the time. And so I don't see any reason to stop planning and thinking. I mean, we don't take action all the time. When we take action, it's something we bring to city council, which happens really once or twice a year. So, any work we're doing right now, it's not like we're charging ahead and making things that are actually becoming laws for the city or anything. We're just deliberating, and learning. So no, I don't, that doesn't mean a lot to me, because I don't think it would be helpful for us to do nothing, but I mean, I get that we shouldn't rush into anything, but I don't think that's happening either. Do anybody else have?
Yeah. I just think like a lot of that zoning stuff, as Mike, you said, is technical, that people over the list, but some of the more controversial, I didn't know if that's something that has traction beyond. Well, I mean, I'm with you, but the larger picture, I didn't know.
I don't know if anybody's been participating in, those working groups that are talking about, the downtown and housing. I know there's a bunch of different working groups working on different things. I was tied up in the first two and not really sure where they're at currently, but I can understand there being a desire. We heard a couple people feeling like that, maybe it makes sense to wait. I would think that those things are future looking, like whatever they're working on now, if those are things the city is considering and that we're going to consider, those are future looking, whereas all the things that we're talking about are sort of incremental. And I get it. Like there's like this whole debate, like, I think Mike, you got called out on it in the listening session, right? It's like, okay, so we do this, and what's going to happen to housing? Well, probably nothing, right? That's the reality, right? Nothing is going to happen. So why do it? Well, because if we want to do everything, but if we did it all at once, everybody would come to city council and say everything's going to get demolished because there's nothing protecting it. And so again, I think, I heard that and I understand why that would seem like a common sense approach. Like but I think what they're talking about is the future state. Like, what do we need to do in the future? And I think those are things that I look forward to hearing what they're talking about and things we should consider. But I personally don't think it impacts the stuff that we're talking about now.
That's a good point, Gabe. And one thing I wanted to bring up, and it's a little related to what you're talking about, is Mike, when you have a chance, could you send me maybe I don't know if this is publicly accessible info, that's why I'm asking. We had Emma Zaves, who is the chair of one of the housing committees, show up, and she was a little surprised, it seemed, that what we were talking about. And I think part of that just has to do with the different roles each of us has. I don't think anyone did anything wrong. But the truth about Montpelier is we've got a lot of subcommittees. We've got a lot going on. Gabe just made reference to some non-housing committee like discussions that are taking place and some planning. Like, it's kind of all over, and sometimes we aren't always talking to each other. So I thought I would, one thing we could do to respond to Emma's surprise is for me just to at least touch base with the committees that are most related to housing, which I know that there's a new one that's related to that I think that I believe Diane Sherman is chairing. And then there's the committee that Emma's chairing. And there may be another, but get in touch with those groups, get the contacts. If there's any of these future planning stuff, like what Gabe's talking about, maybe include them too. But what I'm thinking, and you guys tell me what would be preferred, we reach out and just to connect on an informal way to get to know each other. Maybe we could do something like have a meetup event with all of the people from all of those different groups there, so that we can at least, like, the advantage there would be we could just informally learn some of the background about what's currently being worked on. We could, on the other hand, we could do a formal thing too. We could have just a planning commission meeting, say, where we invite those people and give everyone a few minutes to present on what they're doing. I see bonuses or advantages to doing it either way. It's really just to catch up with each other. Obviously not to make any decisions or do any planning. That's why I was thinking the informal thing, just to be clear, this would be okay. I think it would be okay with open meeting law, because it wouldn't be a meeting. It would be just a, like, getting to acquainted type thing. Just, I don't know. What do you guys think's needed, or what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, I'm all for it, because it seems that all of us are kind of working in our silos, and not really talking to each other much, and we're not going to each other's meetings. Like, I don't know if you guys go to the housing committee meetings, but I think it does make sense for us to just work, at least know what other committees are coming up with and what they would like to see happen. That makes a lot of sense to me.
I think there's only one committee. Emma, so Diane Sherman, I think, is moving or something, so she had to step down from being chair. So I think I think it's the same committee. Just Emma's now the chair.
Okay, and it's the regular housing committee, right?
Yes.
And I thought there was like a special thing created for like the housing crisis or something like that, like an emergency type thing created. Am I mistaken? No.
Not that I know of. I mean that the meetings that Gabe had talked about created a separate thing. I don't know if they've got a housing piece in that. It's kind of outside city government. Kind of do some thinking about resiliency. So that may be what you're thinking of.
Okay.
But I don't know if there is a housing piece with that.
Just so I can, like, there's things, I feel like there's things I know that are going on and things that I don't. So maybe it's helpful to lay it out there. I'm aware of the flood meetings that have been happening that are organized by, it's not the city, but just, I don't actually remember the organizations involved, but,
technically, the city was a piece of it. The city of Montpelier, Montpelier Alive, and the Montpelier Foundation, the three groups came together to go and host the resiliency discussion meetings.
Okay.
And then throughout that, there was the voting that said we don't want to have this be another city set of committees. So it's going to kind of spin off onto its own thing, which we're not exactly entirely sure how that's going to work, but we'll be watching and seeing how it goes.
Okay. So no other housing related committees come to mind? Okay. I guess that's good. That's good. Because I know at one point we had there's a housing trust fund group. Would the kind of thing I'm talking about even be relevant for them though? To be included?
I'm trying to remember now if our recommendation was to merge that with the housing committee. I'm not sure how that ended up settling out in the end. I'd have to go and talk to Josh to see where that finished out. But we did have a housing task force and a housing trust fund committee. And our recommendation was if they were going to form a housing committee that they dissolve both of those and put both of those duties under the housing committee. And I thought that's what they did. So I don't think we have a trust fund committee anymore. It's a subcommittee of the housing committee.
Okay. Well, that's good. So it's not as messy as I was thinking. But nevertheless, probably good to connect with them. Does anybody have thoughts about whether connecting like that's a good idea and whether we should do it formally or informally?
I think it's good. I agree with Maria and you. It's a good idea. I would say formally. I'm sorry. I was going to say formally is probably better. I mean, we have tried to do a social gathering with the planning commission, and we didn't get a great attendance on that. Maybe better weather will draw people out. It was like
that's why I was thinking if we invite like 14 people, we'll get a better showing than if we invite 7.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of shaming the other members of the planning commission right now, but we didn't have. We didn't really have.
Duly noted, Brian. Duly noted.
Okay, so maybe formally too, because you want a captive audience. Got it.
No. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Someone had to say it. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Even if we did the informal thing and only like 1 or 2 people from the housing committee show up, it would at least be informative. But
sure.
Yeah. Okay.
I do either.
Okay. Well, maybe we can. I'll reach out to them and ask their thoughts. Does anybody else have anything else like thoughts to share, or I'll reach out to Emma though in the near future and see if there's a preference there.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Whether it's formal or informal, I'd love to not meet on Zoom if possible. Just that out there.
Agree.
Okay.
That makes it hard though, right? Is City Hall still recovering?
Yeah, it's really hard because most of the places that were typical formal, if it's going to be formal, then it has to be ADA accessible. And City Hall isn't ADA accessible. And there's a ton of places that have their elevators out of order right now.
can we use like school buildings? Like what type of, I mean, does it need to be a publicly owned building for us to meet formally?
No, it doesn't have to be publicly owned. It just has to be ADA accessible.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll reach out to them and see what the thoughts are. But yeah, Mike, if you could point me toward Emma's contact info. Do we have any other thoughts about things that were said? I mean, we heard a number of things. A lot of it was related. We heard a few things that weren't related. One of the things was a discussion of the difficulty in someone doing a development and having to pay for utility hookups. And I'd be interested to know more about that topic, because if there is something that we could do and city can do to help with that, that might be, I don't know if there's room there to be helpful or what.
Some of those may be changing. I don't have the details of it. The Home Act, I think, changed some stuff. A lot of times people get concerned. There is a Public Works has a connection fee, which isn't, my understanding, isn't that outrageous. But what becomes an issue is the state charges, even though it's the city's wastewater plant, the state charges fees based on usage, and the state takes those fees, even though we're the kind of the ones that own and operate the sewer plant. So it's kind of this weird system where the state kind of collects up all this money. And so I think in the Home Act, there was supposed to be some readjustments of that to try to go in, because it was becoming a significant barrier to some people. And maybe Gabe knows more. He's put a few houses in and might have some idea of, but there is one that's a city hookup fee, and that's to help cover the costs that the city incurs. But then there's also the usage fee that the state charges, and that's usually significant. So it can be, yeah. And for a smaller project like an ADU, the fee for the extra usage can be, a more significant charge.
Do you have anything to add about that, Gabe?
I don't know. Like I'd have to go look through fee schedules. I don't feel like that in and of itself is an insurmountable obstacle. I think it's all of those things in combination, right? It's like, oh, you're changing use, so therefore, you got to upgrade all your systems, the fire system. It's like when you add it all up, that's where it's like, whoa, the numbers don't make any sense to do. And, we're not going to change the fire code, right? That's sort of out of our hands. The parking thing is something we could address. We've kind of talked about it before. I don't think in the lifting of the density, there was no discussion of extending the no parking, was there? Did we talk about that? I can't remember that we talked about that.
No.
We've talked about it on and off over the years.
Because I think for that one state building that Peter Kelman was talking about, I think that would have been an example of one of those issues. So even if density requirements were lifted, right, and there was the ability to put 6 units in instead of 4 or whatever it was, I can't remember his example, right, but it was capped. You couldn't do it because of the parking requirements, right? So maybe that's something we should also talk about. If we're going to lift density, if we do agree to do that at some point, maybe that same area shouldn't have parking requirements. So I think just in combination of all those things, again, I'd have to go look at the numbers and stuff, but I don't think it's just the water hookups that are, like onerous. It's the whole process.
Yeah. And I think I wasn't going to take up a debate with Peter. It was a listening session, so I wasn't going to push back on a lot of his claims. So Peter's project there, he described what he wanted to do as a project, and he said there was nothing we would do. And what we told him was, in fact, you'd have to go to the Development Review Board. Our zoning is really set up if you do everything that we want, we will issue a lot of our permits administratively. So things are really designed for, if you're not going to be in the water setback, and you're not going to, you're going to meet all the parking requirements, and you're going to meet all these requirements, you're going to meet the setbacks. If you're going to meet everything, it's an administrative permit. If you want a waiver to that setback for your garage, and you want a waiver for the parking, and you want an exemption for something, you have to go to the DRB. And Peter didn't want to go to the DRB. No, I don't want to go to the DRB. I have to go and spend my money that I used. I have only 6 months to spend the money, and I don't have time to go to the DRB. You need to go and waive this. And we said, no, we can't, and we won't. But there is a process, and he easily would have probably received the waiver had he gone to the DRB and asked, because there's a lot of things about proximity to to public transit. I mean, that place is right next to public transit. He would have easily gotten an exemption there. So there were a number of exemptions. Would he have gotten approved? I don't know. But he certainly had a number of cases that he could make to go and say, I've got a lot of opportunities here where my residents don't need to have parking spaces. So I don't know. So he had other issues. Same thing with his project that he had up on Northfield Street that he complained about, that he wanted to subdivide, and we wouldn't let him subdivide and do it. And he absolutely could have. He just had to go to the DRB, and he didn't want to because he wanted to spend his money now. So he went to Williamstown, and good for him. Good for going to Williamstown. It's a town that doesn't have zoning. You can do whatever you want without pulling any permits, and that is probably what would work best for him in his case. We've got the rules. The rules, you can talk to a number of people who are builders. Nobody likes the zoning. Nobody likes going and getting permits every day. But the other scenario of not having any rules would create a lot of problems. So we set up rules that say, if you can meet what it is we want you to do, you can get your permit, usually in 24, 72 hours, depending on whether you need site plan. But he didn't want to go to the DRB. So
what's the delay time between someone applying for something that needs to go to the DRB and then getting a DRB hearing? Do you immediately get put on the list for the next DRB hearing?
For the most part, yeah. We don't get a lot of DRB here. It used to be in the past. So before 2018, 50% of all permits went to the DRB. So we had 140 permits issued every year. About 70 of them went to the DRB, and 70 of them were administrative. Today, after 2018, we've got that number down to about 20 that go to the DRB and 120 that are either administrative or have to go to might have to go to DRC, which is a much quicker turnaround. But for the most part, these would be fairly quick. So the difference in time is a DRB hearing is required to have a 15-day notice. So because you've got to put that notice in the paper, you're pushed out to 21. So between 21 and 28 days after we have a complete application, because they meet every other week, you'd get on the DRB agenda 21 to 28 days. Then we'd have to write a decision 35 days. So after you apply, so you're looking at our goal is to have all DRB applications in and out in 45 days. That's longer, but if you were looking at other communities, a lot of other communities have multiple. They only meet once a month, so you might be pushed even farther. So, but that's just the minimum. That's the fastest you can go under state law, is about between 32 and 45 days.
So let me just throw out here, to Peter, and there was another gentleman. I think actually had a couple people on this point, right, talking about some of the administrative costs associated with conversion. And I think as we have these conversations, I will say the entire process is very expensive. if you're going to a DRB, you're paying an engineer's time. You may have a couple engineers. You may have a traffic engineer. You might have an attorney if there's a lot of opposition, right? So just think every, that's $1,000 an hour, or $1,200, $1,500 an hour. And then the other thing that you find at the DRB, there's a lot of room for discretion, right? So if something goes to Meredith and it all meets the lines and the engineers all say it's good, that's it. Things are done. But within the DRB, there'll be a lot of requests for things to be done that are they part of the code? Are they not part of the code? Those things all add cost. And so for people who are trying to develop workforce housing, it becomes almost impossible. I mean, there's a lot of reasons it's hard. It's not DRB's fault, but certainly all of those layers. So if there are things that we can do to say, look, there are things that just as of right, like I think of the homeowner that wants to add a couple apartments inside of their, like those, $10,000 for this and $5,000 for that. I mean, these things start getting really expensive when you get a quote from a contractor that says, oh, it's going to be, $120,000 just to do this refit that you want and get the utilities put in. And then you have these administrative costs. I think the more that we could do as right, the better off we are. It just will reduce some of that friction. So we have a great DRB, Mike. I'm not complaining about the process. I'm just saying there's definitely costs.
Okay, well, that's something for us to think about.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we definitely have thought about that. That's why we did as many changes as we did back in 2018, was to shift as much as we could out of those, what does the DRB really have to look at, and try to shift as much as we can to be administrative permits, because there's no reason to warn all these hearings if people are doing what we want them to do. So that's why we kind of boxed them into these things of, if you meet the parking requirement, you don't need to go to the DRB. So that's why we have administrative site plans and DRB site plans. So, and we could talk about making more things administrative, but that was one of the big pieces. And it did make a big difference, as you can see by the numbers, going from 70 to 30 to 20 DRB hearings a year.
So I feel like I have to weigh in on the parking things. I really don't like the parking requirements. I feel like, do you have a sense of whether that is something that comes up often in front of the DRB, that people are looking for parking requirement waivers? It seems to be throwing like a wrench in the system that does not need to be there.
So when we changed the parking rules in 2018, we made a number of changes, not only to the number of parking spaces. It used to be 1.5. We went down to 1. We also allowed stacking of parking and a number of other tricks, as well as the parking waivers. We opened up a number of parking waivers. So if you have, let's say, a driveway that's 60 feet long, you have 3 parking spaces according to the zoning, because we allow stacking. It used to be, under the old zoning, every parking space had to have a free and clear access back to the road. So a driveway was technically only 1 parking space, because no matter how long the driveway was, you were not allowed to block in another car and have it count. You could use it that way. You could always stack it with the number of vehicles if you want to, but when we're counting them for zoning, you couldn't. So there's a lot of things people can do and I don't know anything about that Baldwin Street property, but if somebody has a property and you measure out your driveway and like, oh, my driveway is actually 60 or 80 feet long, that's 4 parking spaces. As a single family home, I'm only need to have 1. Or if I wanted to have a duplex or a triplex or a quadplex, if I have an 80-foot driveway, I can have a quadplex. And it's up to the landlord to figure out how everybody's going to park in and how everybody gets in and out. But people do it. And we used to do it, when I moved to Burlington, a long time ago, we used to just park on the street, and then at the, because they had the parking bans, we would just pull in and park in the correct order. We knew everybody in all the other 4 apartments, and we knew so-and-so leaves first. So I've got to be parked in because they'll leave before me, and then I can get out when I have to go to work at 8 because they leave at 7. So there's no sense having them pull in first and have me block them in, because then I'd have to get up to let them out. So people just figure it out.
Why do people need to park in a driveway? I guess I don't fundamentally understand why that is necessary.
It's been the argument that has been made at the council has been that it is hurting the lower income renters, especially folks on like Berry Street and other places like that. I'm pretty sure most of the planning commission, I'm certainly willing to go in a number of neighborhoods to say they don't need to have parking standards at all. There are a couple of places where it's tough, it's tight, and we just need to figure out whether we just leave it up to the market to figure out. But the concern that's been raised at the council is that landlords are just going to put in more landlords who have a parking lot and a building. If we took away the parking requirement, would simply build an addition onto their building and take away all the parking and force people to park on the streets, and there's already no place to park. And it's just going to hurt low income people even more, because now they won't have any place to park and they're going to get towed in the winter because
if they have a house to live in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
seriously,
also-
seriously, that's the argument that comes up in council. That's the market will figure it out, right? Somebody's going to go rent a parking space, right? I mean, I don't know. That doesn't sound like a good argument. Sorry.
But why are they getting towed in the wintertime?
We had parking bans in effect. So recently things have changed. When I got here in 2014, starting November 15th, I think, November 15th, maybe, November 15th to May 15th, no on-street parking. Nobody was allowed to park on-street overnight. That was it. So, and then they tried to go through, and they've gone through probably 4 or 5 different iterations of how we can allow people to park, because we don't have to plow every night. So if it's not snowing, why can't people park on the street overnight? So they went through and made some exceptions, but there are still nights where parking bans are going to be in effect and people have to have a place to put their cars. And that becomes the burden for the folks in certain neighborhoods like Berry Street in particular. It's usually called out for that. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure. That's the argument that has been made a number of times, is that this is just hanging it on the low income folks to tackle this. But,
and in Montpelier, low income basically means like 60 grand a year income, because you're not living here if you're truly low income. But
so I'm like, I feel like there's like these like reasons being put forward that are, so the parking bans are there because the snow plows need to come through. That's the idea. And because
a lot of communities have that.
Okay. But I'm just coming back to like, this is just, it keeps on like prioritizing streets and road traffic over people's homes and pedestrians. Like, why are we so focused on making it easier and easier? And like, there's like this whole recent conversation on Front Porch Forum about how fast cars are driving through Main Street, through Elm Street, through Northfield. I think every single like high traffic area, like somebody had written in from that neighborhood complaining about cars going like 50 miles per hour on their street. And yet we still have all these policies in place to make sure that it's easier for people to drive really fast on our streets, well, at the same time, hurting people who are trying to live here, like it just seems like there's like this like prioritization that keeps happening, and it's like in like it's indirect, but it keeps benefiting drivers and single family homeowners, and it's just like it's perpetual almost. And like I don't know, like so this whole like parking ban, like So we're artificially reducing parking in a city. And then because of that, we now have to pave over yards and other areas that could absorb stormwater runoff so that we can house our car there, which could otherwise be used to house people and children and families. It's just like, I'm sorry, it just like this whole thing just seems like this like circular conversation. But
Yeah, so there were a lot of proposals. There have been, John Adams has been a big proponent of trying to reduce or eliminate the parking standards. And we've never had parking standards, or it's been a long time since we've had any parking standards in the urban core. So urban centers 1, 2, and 3 don't have parking requirements. We did get to expand it to residential 1500, which is some of the highest density ones right next to the core. That did pass to eliminate parking requirements in there, but I think we had a proposal to eliminate it in a couple other districts as well, and it didn't fly. I think more than once we've made that pitch of eliminating the parking requirements. But
so the last time this came up, Mike, it was just internally on the planning commission, and then it was when Barb was on the planning commission, and she was very adamantly opposed to making any more changes to parking, and so it was something that I decided not to try to pursue with a split planning commission on, honestly. But it did come up. It was probably around 3 years ago now that discussion took place. So it's been more than 3 years since we, as a planning commission, have put something forward with the city council. So I think that since some time has passed since any changes were made to parking or any proposals were put out there, then maybe it's something we could revisit on this this iteration of zoning changes. Maybe I think one way to go about it could be to go back and identify the places where we think it would make the least amount of impact on traffic concerns, which means not Berry Street. We probably would not propose to take away the parking requirement or the space requirement on Berry Street, but maybe some other neighborhoods. I think like I live in the Meadow, and I think I checked at one point, and I'm pretty sure that we have it in the Meadow, the space. Yeah. So there might be some places where that's not needed. So maybe if it's, what do you think, Mike? And then also Planning Commission chime in if you don't like this approach. If Mike comes back with some suggested neighborhoods where we could remove that the parking requirement. This would be in nature with the incremental approach that we've taken with so many things. It would be incrementally, as Mike said, like years ago we lightened up on the parking requirements, and this would just be a further lightening up, a further increment in that direction.
Well, I think certainly in the areas, if we are going to lift density, right? I mean, it sort of defeats the purpose to have parking requirements there. We have this other issue about the proposed fourplexes on any lot, which I think the city is going to get sued. I think some city will be sued by interpreting it the way that you explained last time, Mike. I think the legislature is pretty clear on what they meant. I've talked to some of the legislators, and they meant that any lot it doesn't matter about density, any lot can have a fourplex if it's served by water and electric utilities. So, but that brings up a whole nother issue, right? If you're going to have a fourplex in any of these places, probably some of our neighborhoods still will need to have parking requirements, I would think. They just can't support it on street.
A few things. I just sent everybody an article from the Atlantic from over the summer, by the way. It's about parking. The Atlantic's usually a good read, so just FYI, that's in your inbox. Gabe, what are your thoughts then about if we were like are you in favor of lightening up on the parking requirements? When I say parking requirements, I mean the requirement that a unit have a space.
Yeah, I am. I almost feel like we need to figure out the other density requirements and then come back to it, though. I feel like without
Okay.
knowing if we're going to support some of these other things, and then it could be just a standalone too. And I do think Mike's team probably, I don't know, you probably did some of this analysis before, Mike. I would think, right? You probably already have places that you feel like, oh, we could do it here and do it there.
Yeah, I mean, a number of the places that we talked about, I mean, some of the obvious cases, which don't really make that much of a difference, but just as a point of fact, I mean, if you were on River Street or East Montpelier or over on Route 302, that's still River Street. All of those you can't have on-street parking. So really, you could just go through and say, we're not going to have a parking requirement. You can figure it out. However many parking spaces you want to put for your business, you can figure it out. If you want a big parking lot at the wayside, you can have a big parking lot at the wayside. If you don't, because you're not impacting your ability to negatively impact either the safety of the road or any of the abutting properties is zero, because you're not on East State Street where all the parking spaces are taken, and now you want to put a bigger use in there that's going to add, a demand of 20 more cars onto a street that doesn't have any space to accommodate it. Those are the situations. So a place that doesn't have on-street parking shouldn't have any parking requirements, in my opinion. Just doesn't make any sense. It's up to you as the property owner to figure out how to accommodate it, because you can't otherwise make your project work. So that's up to each project to figure it out. So those are obvious ones, but you also can get into some of the other ones that are, I think the lower density ones are real easy. So if you're up on off of Northfield Street, if you're on Colonial Drive and these things like that, I mean, the lots are big. You got big driveways. I don't even know if people park on street on those. They're just, Isabel Circle. I don't think people are parking on the street. It's just, you've got big lots, you've got big driveways. Most people would prefer to park in their driveways, and there's no real demand to park in the street. So I think there's a lot of these low density ones that are real easy candidates, and they're ones where there's no on-street parking. Those are easy. I think the hard ones are when you get to the East Montpelier, the East State Street, Berry Street, Elm Street, in that section next to the Meadow. Those are places where the parking can be tight, and that's where I think politically there's going to be more of a pushback in those areas. The Loomis and the Liberties, there's, for the school, because the schools have no parking for the schools, all the teachers park on the street. So, the Meadow kind of escapes a lot of that because they're not close enough to any of the schools. But if you're St. Paul, School Street, Loomis, I think those get really Hubbard, those get really filled up, especially during the school year. So again, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but I'm just saying those are the places politically, when you see people come out of the woodwork and complain, those are the neighborhoods they're going to be complaining about. I don't think anyone's complaining about, farther out on Route 12 because there's no on-street parking, or, Cumming Street, or those. So I think there's going to be a handful of neighborhoods that we'd probably have to really consider because of the existing parking issues. From a political standpoint, that would be probably where you draw the line.
Yeah, and a related issue is that the city, just in case anyone doesn't know, the city tried to build a parking garage as and had funding with the hotel involved and very complex thing. And then there was a lawsuit from some residents, and the lawsuit never really made it to the merits. It just was enough to tank the deal. I think that's, correct me if my summation is wrong there. But so that's why we didn't have this big thing that would have been very helpful for, but it'd be nice for us to not forget about, the city's ability to alleviate parking issues and then let us change the zoning accordingly, because the things kind of go hand in hand. Anyway, okay, so we can think about the parking thing later.
I'll just jump in one last thing that I remembered. Maria was asking what was the opposition to the parking. There were a lot of anecdotal stories of the people who have parking spaces, and they can get home with all of their groceries and their kids, and the lower income folks are going to have to go and walk these, they'll have to walk 1,000 feet because that's what, walk 1,000 feet with their kids carrying all their groceries back to their apartment buildings. And this isn't fair to those folks that they can't have parking spaces close by. And again, I'm not saying right or wrong, that those are the stories that were being told that pretty much that did kill all of the proposals to remove the requirements. So I just happened to remember that was another popular story.
Yeah. So another personal planning before Marcella, she was a renter, and she was actually really concerned last time we discussed this because she did think there was some equity problems with renters, but I don't think that's the way she put it. It was just renters. Anyways, I think we should probably move to the big item here, which is possibly vote on a density approach. And like Abe was saying, once we know more about our density approach, we can think about maybe adding some incremental parking changes that go along with it. So what do people think about the options that are out there? Or have you come up with any other ideas based off of all the feedback or in light of the feedback? I was surprised that we had some really great feedback, by the way, which was, we knew theoretically that this should be helpful, but then we actually had more than one landlord show up and say, no, this would make a very practical impact for me right now, which was really great, I think, to know that. What were you going to say, Mike?
Yeah, I was going to say that the piece that came through for me that I thought was the clearest recommendation of the ones we had kind of listed as options was there seemed to be a lot of support for the 4-unit idea. So if you've got a conforming lot, you can have up to a quadplex, regardless of your density. And that goes a little bit to Gabe thinking that's what the legislators wanted to begin with. But we, as I said, our attorney said technically no, it doesn't, it still has to follow the density requirement, but that could kind of go away if we go and make this recommendation as well. It just goes through and says, because I think it's incremental. It's that stepped approach of saying we're not eliminating density altogether. We're just saying if you've got a conforming parcel and 90% of the parcels are conforming, then you can have 4 units on a conforming parcel, assuming you have all the other requirements, including having 4 parking spaces as things currently sit.
So Mike, yeah, I agree that's an easy win basically politically, because you've got state law that's coming and that we would be dodging a bullet with that anyway. So yeah, easy win. I'm not of the mind though that's the only change we should put forward, because I think it is important to start loosening up density and getting away from it in the long term, or else this is going to be the conversation that's had every year or two until finally, we stop doing it. I'd just like to save the whole city, save everybody a whole lot more time by also moving away from just the notion of density. And that also is much more responsive, I think, to what Congressman Urbanism said and other things.
Yeah, I'm a fan of, I don't know, in terms of how the votes go, Mike, right? Like we put all the layups up front, right? And then you get maybe you get on to sign off on the things that we know are going to be easy. I don't know. I think I'm a big fan of our approach of this, hey, wherever we have, what is the term? The design review. Wherever we have design review that we don't need to have the density requirements, I do think that should go hand in hand with no parking requirements. I think that should all go together. But if we can't get it, at least we're having the conversation again. Like every time we have the conversation, we're having the conversation again. And it would be nice if in the same package also, Mike, I don't know where we're at in this. And I know, you're right in the mix of all, right? We got HUD stuff happening or whatever's going on with the trailers and FEMA and all this kind of thing. I thought we were going to try to have a designated growth area or NDA or whatever that term is, right? That was going to go up Northfield Street and also go all the way down Berry Street up into the Country Club Drive. But I don't know if that got derailed with the flooding and everything. To me, that would be, if we had all that stuff in one package, I think the fourplex is going to be a layup, really. And we'll see what the rest of it, we can have a good conversation about. Is there an NDA discussion in the works, or is that we're just not ready for that?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be in the zoning. We already meet the zoning requirements for the NDA. It probably wouldn't be up Northfield Street, but there's a debate as to whether or not we do an NDA for some of the areas. It could make sense to just do the growth center, but they're also proposing making changes to all the programs. So we're not really sure exactly where we're at with all of the details. So really depends if there's value to putting in the application. The NDA is supposed to be it should be adjacent to and whatever with the existing designated downtown. So Northfield Street becomes tricky because it kind of has to abut onto the growth center. The growth center already goes out Northfield Street. So, but yeah, so the fourplex was one proposal. The no density in the design review was another. And we can put these together. Really, it kind of comes down to, a lot of these come down to, if this goes forward, and it won't be difficult for you guys to go through and approve these. Where it becomes a challenge is when it gets to city council. We need to make sure we've got more people there. I think in the past, sometimes we've done these proposals and it gets past the planning commission and it kind of hits council, and it's really Kirby and me, and we end up with about 10 to 15 opponents that really, if we're going to make a push for density, we will need to make a group push for density.
We'll do better this time. I think we're all aware and we're ready. So I think we'll do better at that this time. Just to be double checking, Mike, will you personally be supportive if we propose to get rid of density in the design review district?
Yeah, I think we're going to be in better shape on it this time. We have a proposal to amend the demolition requirements, and so we can make we can make that push. I think the previous one, our previous proposal wasn't attached to the design review boundary, I don't think. And I think that was where
the previous one was just, it was smaller. I mean, it was just one or two little neighborhoods down by the river.
Yeah, it wasn't the design review at all.
Yeah.
What,
yeah,
can you
it was
describe
that's
what
right.
this-
Riverfront was before, but only part of Riverfront is in design review. So that was where I had the issue, was that CNU's push was that if you have good design review standards, then you don't need to have the density requirements. And Barb pushed the fact that, you know, only part of Riverfront is a large district and only a small piece of that actually has design review. So I had to agree with her on that fact that, yes, there'd be no density in Sabin's pasture. There'd be no density and no design review.
There were also a lot of claims made by people from the public about what was said in the CNU letter that were just the opposite of what CNU was saying. Like they were, you know, so I think everyone should have access to that in your email. And if you don't, let me know. I can share it again with you. But we should brush up on the CNU letter so that we're aware of what was suggested of us. They talk in a sort of academic way, and they don't talk in the same way that we always talk in these meetings. Just FYI about that. But I think it's pretty clear what they were saying, and they were definitely suggesting big changes. Okay, so Mike, you're saying that you would be on board if we do that. Does it?
Can I just ask Mike, what you mentioned this demolition change? What can you describe that? Because I know that was. It sounds like you're trying to take the foil out of the people who say, but it is, some things over time need to be demolished too. So I'm interested to know what that's about.
Yeah, so we've got a proposal. We had a project that had to go to environmental court for a demolition. And so the environmental court went through and had a review of our rules and didn't make recommendations for changes. But it was interesting to see how a judge interpreted our zoning as it was written. And so that kind of led us to make a number of recommendations for how to make adjustments. We're not entirely sure historic preservation will be 100% happy with it. But we're trying to strike a balance of being clear and allowing, you know, demolition is going to happen, and what are the conditions in which it would be okay for a demolition to occur. And so that proposal is in there. So when we get done within the next, you know, before the next meeting, I will post the strikeout copy of the zoning on the city website, send you guys the link to it, because it's really, I mean, it's like 35 megabytes because it has so much information in it. So I really can't email it. But that was, you know, that was a common complaint the last time we did the density this was Sandy Vitzium, Barb. People are going to come in, they're going to buy up the houses, they're going to demolish them, and they're going to put in these giant flat roof buildings that cover the entire place. And there's not going to be any parking requirements, so they're just going to fill the entire place and dump all the parking onto the streets. And, you know, and council goes and asks, is there anything we could do if they wanted to make that proposal? Would this be a permitted use? Yes, it would be a permitted use. They could do it, and there's nothing we could do to stop them. The reality is the market isn't there to do such a thing, but the argument as you know, as you know, the straw man argument there, just it, you know, I can't say, well, you know, they're all administrative permits, so there literally is nothing I could do. If the rules are you don't need parking, then yes, I don't think anyone would. But I think if it's in design review, then we get a say. If we've got good demolition rules or better demolition rules, then we'd get a say on having that process there. Whatever gets rebuilt would have to be in design review, so it would have to be, you know, made a lot better. That was one of the reasons I was thinking the fourplex rule should be very easy. Nobody's going to tear down a Victorian to build a giant flat roofed quadplex. You know, it's just, nobody's going to do that because their argument is people on, Loomis Street, they could put a 16 unit building on Loomis Street and it would be huge and ugly. And that's what the market would push for. And that's what people would build. But, I'm not an economist. I'm not a housing marketer, so I can't push back on that claim. I can just go through and say, I just seriously don't think that's going to be happening. But
I mean, it's never happened for one. I mean, that's one thing to point out. Even in the places where we don't have density, I mean, in the downtown areas,
they like to point out Cedar
Street. Been torn down.
They like to point out Cedar Street.
They like to point out Cedar Street, yeah, which was nothing was torn down there, right?
There was an old carriage barn that was there. It was really not in good shape, but it was not in the design review district. It's the first property outside of the design review district. And
Did
under the old zoning,
6 new homes though? Like
they created 6 new homes with a flat roof, though. The flat roof, and that was it.
It's a perfectly aesthetically fine building, and
not according to the architects.
According to those folks, it's the ugliest building in the city, which tells you some really nice things about our city, I guess. Yeah. So okay. So those are the things we've heard before. I just want to make sure we're moving along. One thing that's we kind of fell off the plate a little bit because it seems like we're trying to wrap up this like zoning package really soon. There's the solar shading. Are we still thinking of talking about that and including it? Is that on your mind, Mike?
I have that on the list as a strikeout. If somebody wants to not strike it out, we can not strike it out, but I am willing to charge that windmill again.
Okay. That's all I need to hear. Okay, so we have that.
We should just make sure John's going to be at that meeting because when he rolls through the data, it's like crazy that you would he just has to be there.
I agree with that. I passed on I think John and I threw together a memo last minute that we gave to city council that went through a lot of that same stuff. I don't know how much it was really read though. I mean, so yeah, we have
a new council.
It could be something that no one raises and it just flies through. But if a controversy does come up, yeah, we should be prepared on that one. So yeah, I don't need to spend any more time here, though. I think we'll.
That was the previous council. The mayor and a number of folks were very much pro solar, and so the fact that we would not have anything that would be protecting, even though our proposal was to protect the solar, existing and proposed solar. They wanted to leave things as they were, but a number of them aren't on the council any longer. So I think this council may receive this recommendation differently. And I actually don't think it was a complete strikeout. I think I'll have to go and check. I think I kept the same proposal in, and we'll have to decide whether we want to keep the same proposal or just strike all, because I think the proposal was just to narrow it to protecting existing and proposed solar devices.
I think strategically what I would advise is we propose to strike it, but then have the language to amend it ready. And so if they say, whoa, striking it's too much, we'll immediately be able to give them a thing that's not so much.
Okay.
And I think they did that last time too. They asked for some new language and I was like, well, yeah, I can have it for you soon, but they wanted it at that present moment. So I think that seems good. Okay, so does the planning commission want to vote on what Gabe was talking about as what we include, or do you want to talk more about options for density resolution? I do want to make the point, I don't want this to obstruct anything, but I do have the personal opinion that the design review district's actually not very big, and that It's really, I feel like the area around National Life is, I think, where it's actually going to matter if we make those changes, like future developments up that way. Because all the other neighborhoods that are closer to downtown, like I don't know if there's a whole lot of room for growth there, really. Just some of the Victorians and stuff, maybe. But anyways, I'm just saying that if we go with the design review and we go with the duplex as a package thing, that's great. That's good. I'm on board. But and maybe that's the smartest thing to do. So I don't want to obstruct anything. I just want to throw that out there that it is small. Like it's not I don't feel like it's impacting a large portion of the city, but.
Yeah, but maybe it's momentum. Get some victories, like Gabe was saying.
Yeah, I see it that way, and that's fine.
I mean, incremental victories, right?
And the fourplex would be citywide. So if we did both the fourplex and the no density, I think the fourplex opens up a lot of room in a lot, well, for the entire town, certainly in the neighborhoods.
I mean, that was a sense I got hearing from we only heard from 2 landlords, I think. And I guess, Mike, there's some debate over like the facts that they were giving us, but just those 2 people would have added like 8 more units to the city.
Yeah,
and
6 something. Yeah,
out there.
yeah.
You know, multiply that. It seems like all these like little 1 or 2 bedroom apartments here and there could really make a big difference.
Yeah, the no density in the design review would have helped Peter Kellman for his Baldwin Street project that he talked about, that he wanted 7 and he was going to have to do the PUD. So yes, that's a much more complicated process to do a PUD to get that density. So if we didn't have density in design review, that's a good step. So I think that's would be a very positive step for that part. So Baldwin Street is west of the Capitol complex, out Route 2. So there are a number of neighborhoods I think that would benefit from it, but then there are a number of neighborhoods that are not design review. And we've tried in the past to expand design review and failed. Ironically, from the same people who are worried that bad things are going to happen by bad developers, but we weren't able to expand the design review district to protect those neighborhoods from the bad developers. So we'll see. That may be a proposal that comes in down the road. We do this step, we remove the density in this area, then we come back, maybe flop back the other way and expand the design review district a little bit more and kind of see a little bit of what we're hoping for or what we might see, I guess.
Okay, so is that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maria.
There's like something that 2 people brought up that I found really troubling about but if we do this, then we'll have more renters, right? As if that was like, and to me, that was just like an overtly discriminatory thing that we were being presented with. And so I'm also wondering if there's like any city that has like a housing policy, like an anti-discriminatory housing policy, that we will not, prefer residents who are homeowners to renters. Like something very simple like that, where like we cannot make regulations and zoning changes based on preferring one group over another. It just seemed really beyond the pale that would be a reason to do something. Did anybody else like?
Yeah,
like,
I was glad the woman spoke up and kind of went and kind of put him in his place on that one, because
she shut that down.
Yeah, she works for me, and she's been faced with one series. It's a series of housing issues for her being a renter in the city. You know, like their one owner moved back into their house and kicked her out, and then like it's just been like a series of her having to find a place to live in town with her child, and it's really difficult, you know. And meanwhile, she is part of this community. Like it's not like I don't know, we want people like her here, you know. It's just yeah. So I don't know. I after that, it kind of made me think that maybe we need to have just like this basic anti-discrimination policy, so that when somebody says something like that to us in a public meeting, we can say, actually, we can't take that into account because, you know, our policy dictates that we can't prefer one group of residents over another, you know. Yeah, and I think a lot of that discussion, like the big bad developers, it's all kind of coded, you know, to me, to prefer.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
coded.
it's way coded. It's not even coded anymore.
I mean,
Yeah, they always talk about
Even-
dog whistles. It's like there's no dog whistle anymore. It's just
no.
Right.
It's
even
those people,
even the
yeah.
even the stuff about hold off and don't do anything because of the flood. To me, there's some coded stuff there where it's just using the code as using the flood as a convenient excuse to stop housing development. And yeah.
I was going to say, I think that has what you're talking about, Maria. I mean, I don't disagree with you at all in terms. I mean, that was a disturbing comment. I'm glad it was shut down, and I've said it a couple of times. But like, that has probably more to do with the kind of people we want to show up at the meeting where this comes to the council, or the kind of people we want talking to the council members before we get to the council. Like that woman calling a counselor, their ward counselor, and saying, you know, softening the ground before this gets there. I can't believe we have to do that, but that sounds like something to get out in front of the demographic you know is going to be there and saying those things. So it might be just more of a numbers game at that point. But yeah, that was not the. I can't believe they just come out and say that in a place like it's a city. Of course we have rent. I don't know. That was bizarre.
Well, Maria, you should hold on to that idea, and I'm not sure the right channel, because that seems like maybe not a planning commission thing, but a thing to bring directly to city council or something. But that is, I don't know. I think it's worth working on considering later.
I will just say, like, and going to Brian's point, I don't know exactly how we marshal the people to be in the hearing. I was working, but I was coming back. I was dialed into that non-city, whatever they did in the State House a few weeks ago. And Sarah DeFelice gave a little like opening speech that was basically like pro housing and pro downtown. And like, we just have to buckle down and do things different. And she actually brought up the garage as an example of how we let, you know, a minority really, and she got like an ovation, like people were cheering. So it's not that people in the community don't understand. They're just not showing up to the right meeting, right? So there's something we need to do. And Brian, I think this is your line of work, right? We just need to figure out how we.
Not anymore. Work for the Secretary of State now.
No. Oh, okay, cool.
No, but it is. But no, you're absolutely right. It's like getting the right people, like to, at the very least, to email the council. You know, it would be a volume play, because the council, at the end of the day, they care about voters. So, you know, and galvanize voters. But you're right. I mean, I think it's just, yeah, you're right. It's pounding on people to go, to the right people to go, or the right people to chime in to beat back the 10 loudest voices.
So we'll be smarter about getting the word out this time. I gotta move us on, because we've got to. There's not going to be anybody to get the word out for if we don't actually propose something. So we should vote on that. and Mike has a whole list of other things that like housekeeping stuff that we're going to have to go through tonight too. So do we have a proposal we'd like to vote for on for the density issue? I'll start with like where Gabe was going before. The the fourplex across the city idea coupled with removing density caps from design review district. Is that the popular approach with everyone? Ariane, do you have thoughts
Okay, well,
about
I'm
it?
going to make a motion that we vote. That way, everybody will know where we stand, right? So
Do it.
Okay.
I move that we as the planning commission adopt those two strategies for density, the fourplex across the city, wherever there's a conforming lot. I think that's the right language, right, Mike? Conforming lot. And then secondly, in line with the Council on New Urbanism recommendations to lift density requirements wherever we have design review. That's my motion.
Okay, so we have a motion from Gabe. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I heard Ariane first, so we'll say she was the second on that. Okay, and now we have to have.
I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not gonna. I'm joking.
Oh, were you the other second, Aaron?
Yeah, it's okay. Ariane deserves it way more than I do.
Oh.
Now we got a third. We'll just mark it as a third.
For the record, Aaron was joking. I don't want anything in the paper about how our density proposal caused a commissioner to storm out or something. That's not what happened there. Okay, so we had a second from Ariane, and we have a discussion now. So now's the time if anyone has any questions, any clarifications, anything. Do you have anything more, anyone?
Can I get a clarification on what a conforming lot is? Like, what would be non-conforming?
So we went through and did an analysis of all the lots. So if you're in the residential 6,000 district, that means your parcel would have to be at least 6,000 square feet for you to have a conforming lot. So parcels have two requirements, frontage and lot size. So if you're non-conforming in one of those, then you'd have a non-conforming lot. But in 2018, we reviewed every single neighborhood and tried to make every single neighborhood be 90% conforming. So we would find out, where that line was. If there were 30 houses in that neighborhood, then 27 of them would have to be conforming. And it made a big difference. I mean, the numbers, under the old zoning, it was like 60, 70, sometimes 80% of the properties were non-conforming. So it was like one of those big steps, before we can really go to no zoning, or no density, let's get to everybody being conforming. So the only ones not conforming right now are basically Town Hill, and we're going to have to fix that. That's in the proposal because they're res 24,000. So everybody's non-conforming because they put up a big stink in 2017, and council said the only way we're going to pass the zoning is to give Town Hill what they want, and so they made everybody non-conforming. But now it's state law; they've got to become conforming. So that'll be one of the proposals.
So conforming based strictly off of the lot size, not for instance, you could have a deck or something that's non-conforming, but it's grandfathered. That kind of thing's not going to keep people from being able to have a fourplex.
No.
Just
non-conformities come in three types. You've got non-conforming parcels, non-conforming structures, and non-conforming uses. We're only talking about the non-conforming lot, and that is either it doesn't have enough frontage or it's not big enough. As long as it's got the frontage, as long as it's big enough, and in 90% of the cases or more, the parcels are conforming. But if you have a non-conforming house on a conforming lot, you can still have a quadplex.
what would you say, Mike, about I know you don't love doing variances or something like that, but having an administrative cushion when it comes to that, like for instance, if this parcel's just shy, it's technically not conforming, but there's nothing obviously wrong with the fourplex going in at that place. Like, I understand that the tension there is is like putting too much work on your office. But I don't know. What do you think?
So there's nothing to prohibit you as the planning commission to put into the zoning the requirement that any parcel and not talk about conforming parcel. We made the recommendation on conforming parcels to avoid having somebody be able to come in and take advantage of there's some funky parcels that you can end up with that are just across the street from Ag Way. You'll see a little fence next to the bike path. There's a tiny piece of land in there that's about 700 square feet that somebody owns, and he's got all this junk in there, and we can't get him to clean it up. But without that rule, he could put a quadplex on there. So that was why we were kind of like, all right, well, you can do this and that. You could put a single family home on it if it's non-conforming. But that was strictly why that rule came into effect, is because somebody could take advantage of it on some of these really small lots. But it's probably rare, and I'm sure John Adams would say, we'll wait till something weird like that comes up and then we'll address it, because the reality is it's not probably going to happen. So we certainly could go through and just say any lot can have 4 units and go from there.
It would actually, I think it would technically be impossible in that example you gave, right? Because you wouldn't be able to meet like setback requirements and stuff like that unless you were building, I don't know, a quadplex treehouse or something.
Yeah, it would be tricky in that particular instance. It would be tricky, but generally you're allowed to build a single family home.
And you're okay. So is your recommendation, Mike, is it based off of just perceived criticisms, or what you think would be a better approach as planning director?
Probably more to do it a little bit of the perceived criticisms.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think where somebody could abuse. I always, it's part of my nature also to look at. So many times we write rules and don't think about how people can abuse them. And so I spend a lot of time when I'm writing my zoning rules, we sit around and say, how would so-and-so take advantage of this loophole? Because there's going to be people that do it. And to try to see if we can't make sure that we protect ourselves against those. And that was a little bit of, you can always put a house on that. You can always put an ADU on that. So you can always get 2 units on a non-conforming lot. You can always get those 2 units, but maybe it doesn't matter.
Do we have thoughts? I mean, we're in the we have a motion, and this is the discussion, and Gabe could potentially amend his motion if he wants to. But what are people's thoughts about whether we because that was a good point from Maria, and it's something that I hadn't thought about enough myself. What are people's thoughts about the conforming lot issue? Include it or not?
I think include it, just like Mike was saying, just make these incremental changes. If down the line, once people are comfortable with having 4 units per lot, then maybe we can chip away at the conforming part of it.
My concern further down the line is just like, we have so many regulations, and we have people say, oh, I would have done this project except for blah blah blah, and this is one of those things that potentially for someone's like, oh, I had everything lined up and ready to go, but my lot's only 95% of the size it needs to be, and that kind of thing. I don't want to create more of those, but Do we have any other thoughts about the conforming? How about if you want to include conforming, give me a thumbs up. No, that didn't really work. Okay. So with lack of discussion, I'm going to say that the people seem fine with the emotion as it stands. Then, is that fair? Okay. Do we have anything else to discuss before we go to a vote? Then. Okie doke. Okay, so those in favor of Gabe's motion, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Right.
I
Okay. Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, so that's the vote. That's our proposal on density. And from there, hand it off to you, Mike, to go through some of the other items that you have for us.
Right. Might have to do something real quick. All right. So I will just go through this real quick. So some of you, probably all of you, have seen this list before. A lot of these are just straightforward kind of technical changes that we needed to make. And a lot of these recommendations I've made. So exempting car chargers from needing to get zoning permits, adding public and private. So there are a lot of small things in here. So part two is really so part one's your introduction stuff. And then part two, and what you'll get is a strikeout that will show what we ended up doing for all of these. And so I still need to get the highlighted one here. What we're doing to rezone Sabins Pasture and Country Club Road. I have a proposal that was put into Regional Planning Commission to get that to me, and they haven't gotten it back yet. Or they sent me a draft, and I haven't had a chance to get in touch with them. A few other changes. This one here changed residential density to 1 per 8,712. So res 9, because of the Home Act, needs to be 8,712. So that changes in there. We had discussed this on the use table, splitting multifamily into 2 groups. So we have, right now it's 5 or more units as multifamily, and what we'll have in the draft is small multifamily, which is 5 to 14, and one that multifamily 15 or more. And the reason for that is the traffic requirements. Conditional use only has two requirements. Technically it has 3, but traffic, community services, and character of the area. So if parking, if the parking requirement, or if the traffic requirement only takes effect with 15 or more units because of the way it's written, and because under state law there's some other exemptions that you can't use character of the area as an excuse to deny a residential project, then there really is no reason to deny the project. So we're going to make it permitted for these 5 to 14 multifamily. So if you meet the requirements for 5 to 14, then that becomes a permitted use. We also, and this gets a little bit to Maria's comment about, fair housing stuff. We've made some adjustments to congregate living. So congregate living we've got two groups. We've got dwelling units, which have all 5 requirements of a dwelling unit, and you own them or you rent them, but you have all of them within your walls. So you've got a bathroom, a kitchen, a living space, a bedroom. There are 5 of them. Can't remember what they all are. In a congregate living, you share one or more of them, and so we've always had stricter standards for congregate living. And so we're going to go and make the congregate living match the dwelling units. So we're not discriminating against congregate living any longer. So if you want to have rooming and boarding facilities or some of these other ones, where you might, even some senior living comes in and you have your unit that you rent, but you have meals together. That's congregate living. And that's held to a higher standard and a more difficult standard to get approved, and that doesn't make sense. So those changes went through. So we have a number of these, and we'll go through all of these at the next meeting, but I emailed this to you, and all of these were the B is the recommended changes, C means they're done or what the change was made. So we went through all these. The gray areas are ones that I've pulled because I just don't have enough time now. So that's stormwater. I'm not ready to get the stormwater stuff fixed yet. There's a waiver, possibly add waiver to location of parking and loading behind front line of existing building. Reconsider in future. I can't remember what was the basis on that one. So this is the one I'm still working on. The major sign revisions needed. I have a proposal that I'm working with Meredith on. So I still need that. I need the zoning map and I need the signs. And I needed whatever changes you guys wanted me to make. So I can get those 3 wrapped up in the next 2 weeks before our next planning commission meeting. And I can get you the strikeout copy of everything. So this is the list. Anything in gray are things that are being held off. And we've got a couple of rezoning things here that have to get in as well. So
I think it makes sense just for homework for planning commissioners before the next meeting. This table is like a summary. Mike said he was going to get an actual strikeout copy so you can read what the changes are specifically in the regs, and we'll probably just approach it to save time by having people read in advance. And if you have questions about a specific part, that we would just bring them up, those things at a time, and probably not discuss every little thing. Does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Okay, this is good, Mike. Thanks. Did you have the solar shading in there? Or, yeah. Is that a thing that's done?
I don't remember what the number was. 32. 32 recommendation, try to remove or revise the solar access and shading rules, and the change was returned to prior proposal to allow protection only for existing and permitted solar facilities. So if you guys want me to do a strike all, I can do the strike all.
I think that's a good idea. Do folks need to be caught up on what this means? I know we've had a mini discussion before for the newer people. Our solar shading provisions were so inadvertently really so strict, or at least, I mean, that's the way I see it, so strict that that you can actually stop, or something can't be built if it's going to cast a shadow in many cases on just blank space, because a solar project could go there theoretically. So it's extreme, obviously. Before, we had proposed to fix it so that only existing or proposed, as in in the works of being built, projects could not be blocked. But so we're talking about possibly striking the shading where we're not regulating it at all, and then if we get pushback that that's too far, then have the language ready to amend it so that it, only real projects are blocked. And the policy reasons behind this are, if you're not letting things, for one thing, John Adams has pointed out that something like 97% or so of the shading in the city is done by trees. It's not like building things is actually producing shading in reality. And then there's the argument that by building something new, you're also creating space for solar panels because they can go on top of these new things that are being built. So it's the current state of things is not only extremely prohibitive and restrictive, but also feasibly stopping solar, being self-defeating. So is everybody good with the strike all to start? Yeah. Okay. Looks good, Mike.
All right, so I'll give one quick final thing on the zoning. So I will be at council on Wednesday because we need to do an emergency zoning amendment for the emergency housing on Country Club Road. So there are a couple of changes. They are on the strikeout list, but they're being proposed now. So one was kind of working backwards in the zoning and the definitions. We have a use for temporary housing, and that includes emergency housing and emergency shelters. So we're going to strike that one. Then we're going to create a definition for emergency housing and create a definition for emergency shelter. And the technical difference between the two is an emergency shelter is not intended for somebody to stay there more than 30 days. That would provide them residency and tenancy in that building. They become a resident of that building. So in general, homeless shelters, they define themselves as shelters, and they don't usually have people stay there 30 consecutive days for that reason. Emergency housing is housing that is built with the intention that people will be staying there as tenants. So that's our FEMA housing. And in our definition, we've limited it to government agencies. So somebody can't sneak in and try to use this as a way of getting a backdoor into beating the zoning code. So if it's a state, federal, or local emergency housing project, then it gets special provisions, which is that it doesn't have to go to the Development Review Board for any permits. It's a permitted use in every district, and any site plan requirements or any Development Review Board requirements would be handled administratively. So the zoning administrator would make those determinations rather than the Development Review Board, and that way the project would move forward, because we will not be able to move and build the FEMA project by December if they have to go to the DRB in October. So this is, I'm reading it in because it needs a 15-day warning. So I'm reading it into them on Wednesday. So council understands it's an emergency order. which they can do in interim zoning without going to the planning commission. And then on the 11th of October, there's a second warned hearing where they would adopt the changes. So there may be some tweaking that goes along with the language, but that's the proposal that's being made. It's mostly just to pave the way for the FEMA trailers. But I wanted to give you guys a heads up so you don't seem blindsided that we're making a zoning amendment without letting you guys know about it.
Does it help if we give you like all our endorsement of this measure? I mean, does it matter? Obviously, everybody wants
Doesn't hurt, no.
I mean, I move that we endorse the emergency zoning measure that Mike's going to introduce.
Okay. Do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Okay, second from Maria. Any discussion before we vote? Okay. Those in favor of Gabe's motion to endorse these emergency zoning changes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So there you go. So Mike can bring that to City Council. Good call, Gabe. Anything else, Mike?
Not in the zoning.
Mike, has a plan come out for the country club yet? Like a long-term plan?
Yeah, there was a big process last year that the entire community went through and made a recommendation, and that came out in May. There was should be on the city's website, the Country Club Road Master Plan. It basically would have, as the plan was laid out, it would, I think, have about 300 housing units up there. Most of it to the left of the country club building. So it'd kind of be up in the lower part. There would be five-story buildings, which would include about 200 something units. And then the road would be going up and across the upper part and would include townhomes and other things. But there's an express interest of not having single family homes. And so there are a bunch of that. And so now we're trying to actually build that out to have more than just 300 housing units. We want to try to get up to 500. But right now we're going to put, the proposal right now is to have the lower field there, the golf course, to have 36 trailers. FEMA and the state want us to leave a space for one of those 5-story buildings, and then we'll get a development partner who will build that building. It would probably take 2 or 3 years to get the building done. But when the building's done, then anyone who a lot of people who are in emergency housing are temporary. They're there until their house gets fixed and then they're moving out. But there may be some people whose houses are permanently gone. They would have an opportunity to move into those things, because we don't, our plan was not to turn the country club into a trailer park. It was to have, a mix of housing types. And so that's the push, is to move those trailers as temporary housing out, but we would have new housing ready for them to move into. And 12 acres were set aside for recreation. So that's the other part of that. So because recreation actually paid $1 million towards getting that project built, or to buying the property. So the rec funds. So there is a portion of it that will be reserved for recreation.
And the possible road construction to connect downtown and the College Green area over towards the country club, is that still to be done, or?
It's still in our plans to do, because we think the best result from an urban design standpoint is to connect that. So it does go up and across the top of the golf course. There's a big gully. We'd have to build a big bridge to get over to Saban's pasture. Then it would our plan is to have the road go across Sabins pasture, across the top, and go all the way to East, where East State matches College. The road would hook up there. And then there'd be another road that would dive down through Sabins pasture and go to Berry Street. So there'd be a little road network there that would allow additional housing development in Sabins pasture. There's still a proposal to have more parkland in Sabins pasture. So we'd really be building out a large project there. Overall, there's 3 parcels that we would be working on for all that housing.
That sounds great. It reminds me that a lot of the flood discussion from the community that I've heard involves an interest in kind of migrating a lot of downtown activity to the College Green area. That's just probably, I don't know, something that I feel like is going to come up for discussion for us later. And it seems like it's connected in with this project, because it seems like that's a bit of the vision with this project too, right? To just have a lot, like a whole, it seems to me like a whole corridor where there's going to be a lot of development between downtown and the country club.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps from a lot of standpoints. Transportation, natural resources. It's out of the floodplain. There's new bike and shared use paths that would be connecting across. They're already proposed. Between the 3 parcels that are there, it wouldn't happen all at once, but maybe we could have 1,000 housing units, and really make a big difference over the next 20 years, 25 years, maybe it's 30 years, but at least there's the potential to have some areas to kind of build out on sewer and water. We would have opportunities to connect utilities up to Town Hill. Town Hill, only part of it has sewer, so we'd be able to run sewer down and fix a number of failed septic fields up in there. So there's it's a project that has so many parts and so many pieces and so many opportunities, that we hope, if the flood kicks off the FEMA trailers, which kicks off the development of Country Club Road, maybe there's a silver lining to everything that lets us, and the state is very, very interested. The governor is or has or plans to declare a housing emergency, maybe something to that effect. And we need to figure out, and maybe that was what is going on to get the FEMA trailers. But they also are meeting with us because they want to see our housing project on Country Club Road move forward, because they're like, Washington County needs housing, and this is the best place for this to move forward. So let's figure out how the state can help. And really what we need is a TIF district. So if they can help us do that, that would be a big help. So.
With the TIF district being obviously based off of the country club area. Yeah.
Well, we'd want it for the whole area, but yeah, we need to count on increment. And so we own the site, so we can count on that.
Okay. Yeah, that was a good good catch up for us then. Yeah, so I'm expecting, like as things progress, that there's probably going to be some zoning discussions coming our way, and things that affect the city. Do we need to actually amend the city plan before we finalize it to account for all of this, the new, like the country club project and the visions associated with it?
Somebody's going to go and push that when we try to go and do stuff, but the reality is no, we don't have to. Same with the zoning. The people who want to oppose the zoning changes are going to go through and say, yeah, but we really should adopt the master plan first, so we should table this whole thing until afterwards.
Like, all I was saying was that should we throw in some, just take what we've got, but then throw in some extra, I'm forgetting the term, the strategies for some of the areas where it's appropriate. Just include some strategies that are focusing on these areas, just to put it in the plan to make sure that the plan is supporting, the future.
Yeah, we have to develop the land use plan, and so that'll be a big piece of it
Okay.
right there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, guys, this has been a lot, Maria.
I was just wondering if people had ideas about how, like, what the best way to spread the word was about these zoning changes and helping them pass. Like, I think Kirby I sent an email out to a bunch of people that I know that I knew would be supportive of it. But like, I don't know, what have you guys tried in the past that may work?
We haven't, as long as I've been on the planning commission, which has been too long at this point, there hasn't been a lot of the planning commission kind of taking the messaging, into their own hands. Although I think it's hugely necessary given like just the dynamic of how things have gone. Anyways, my plan personally, so I can't help you with what we've done in the past because we just haven't been good at it. But I plan to do what you did, like email people, but also reach out personally, especially the people who I know are very much interested, but they've got no good reason to go to a city council meeting because there's, it's, the people who don't want to see something happen are motivated. People who do want to see it aren't as motivated because we are all very busy. We all have a whole lot of us have families and jobs, and just we're very busy parts of our times in our lives. And just letting those people know that please get motivated for showing up for this one thing and letting your voice be heard, because there is a risk that it won't happen if you don't,
Yeah, the housing committee's been a good partner, so they're the ones who probably come out the most so far. So if we have a meeting with them before we have our hearing, that might be a good thing to go through and say, hey, we really need your support, not only at the planning commission level, but at the council level, to make sure the council goes through with our recommendations.
So I have 10, 20 people in mind who I know who are residents of Montpelier and who want to see this progress in these areas, but they're not people who routinely show up to planning or to city council meetings. I'm just going to let them know directly and let them know it's important. I think it's going to just, I think doing our own networking. We've already done our public, we've done the bridge, and I think we should continue doing updates on the bridge. So maybe in a month or two, we should think about doing another, just keeping the discussion open to the public through the bridge. Keep doing those things. But I think that just, personal networking, I think it's a small city. I mean, if all 7 of us got 10 people, that would be an overwhelming turnout.
I was going to say, right. I think the floor was 5. Like, if everyone brought 5 people, that would be the floor. Like, right. So that would be a great, I think it sounds like a great number, plus the leveraging the relationship you have with the committee and there's some housing activists in town. There were we had quite a few people on the call the other night. They weren't all haters in the listening section. Yeah. There were people that were supportive. I'm thinking of Nathan. Nathan could drag along 3, 4, 5 other people with him probably.
Yeah, we need to do that.
We just made we need one ask. We need to be like, go to this one meeting. If you're going to make a difference, go to this one meeting. But I think 35 or whatever the floor is, 5 each.
Yeah, even 35 would be a whole lot. The last time we had, and I don't know, maybe too much is made out of it. The last time that we went to city council and we had some zoning changes, we got some things through. We got some important things through. The zoning that allowed the Habitat project to continue, and other things. But there were 2 lightning rods. One of them was the thing related to density that Mike and I had worked on kind of as a side thing, and we just threw it in there. And then the solar shading thing became a lightning rod. But then there were some big things that got through anyway. And in that case, I would say it was fewer than 15 naysayers, but there were no advocates there because we didn't try to encourage anyone to come. And I did my best to try to. I tried to be optimistic with city council and let's say like, hey, everything's cool, everything's fine, but they were like, our voters are saying otherwise, and so, you know, that's how I would say that went. So it wasn't. I mean, I think it was bad with the amount of negativity, but it was still only 15 people.
Yeah, 15. Yeah.
So there's 7 of us. We all make sure we go. And I would encourage planning commissioners to speak out as planning commissioners, but also as residents, by the way. I think, our voices should matter, and we should have, I believe that we have credibility with the city council. That's why they appointed us. So there's that too. Okay, well, we're out of time. We had a big, I think we had a great discussion. Thanks, everybody. I'll be reaching out to Emma, and I'll let you know how that goes. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
All right. I'll beat you again, Aaron. All right. With
Story of my
that,
life.
with that, we'll adjourn. Everybody have a good night. See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, everyone.